Welcome to the Swift Healthcare video podcast, exploring the intersection of healthcare and leadership, hosted by Dr. Patrick Swift. SwiftHealthcare.com is your resource for healthcare professionals to find coaching and consulting to engage, restore, and transform yourself and your organization. And now, here's your host, Dr. Patrick Swift.
I'm so excited about Nancy Jacoby being on the show. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's a joy. And the title of our show here is How to Deal with Resistance, Lead Effectively, and Find Joy in Your Work. I love that. And so, folks, let me share with you Nancy's bio here, which I love doing the top of the show. Nancy Jacoby is a former healthcare executive with 25 years of experience in the industry. She is board certified in healthcare management by the American College of Healthcare Executives and is a fellow of the college. Go ACHE. I'm a FASHA as well, so I'm delighted that you're on the show. Prior to serving in leadership positions, Nancy was a registered nurse with a passion for caring for the geriatric patient. She's actually still licensed in 2 states. And she founded Nancy Jacoby Consulting and Nancy Jacoby Coaching and Consulting. And I have to call out that you went to Xavier University in Cincinnati. Having a great love for the Jesuits, I gotta give a shout out for your Jesuit education and being a Xavier.
That's right. I'm proud to be a Xavier alum.
Outstanding. So what got you into healthcare, if I may? What drew you into healthcare and the passion you have? Because it's so strong and the impact you're having.
Well, Patrick, it's funny because, you fill out these child books that your parents give you, year by year with, your grade school teacher and your friends and what do you want to be when you grow up? Yeah. And early on, looking back, I identified a lot of focus on what I would call helping professions, being a nurse, being a teacher, and nurse stayed there for a good couple of years, right? And, when I first went to college at Xavier, I started out as a psych major because I always had a gravitation towards people with, emotional health needs. And I got attracted to nursing because I felt like I could serve the whole patient and the whole person. And the mission of caring for the sick. I mean, what's more noble than that, right? I've always been attracted to something where in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to have an impact that's more than just on paper. Like I wanted to have a tangible impact.
Yeah.
And that's really what drew me to nursing, and it drew me into healthcare administration, believe it or not, because I could make an impact on so many different levels. People might say, well, that sounds strange. How do you do that? Well, because you can touch the patient, you can touch the organization. And then in a leadership role, you have the awesome responsibility to lead, mentor, and develop others. Mm-hmm. And it was probably one of the most fulfilling parts of my job.
Oh, I mean, it's really, I love that because it's pulling together all of the intention you had of being in the helping profession, even as a young person, and then being in the workforce and being a healer and coaching and helping others heal. And, I hope listeners are thinking about what got you into healthcare yourself, or if you're thinking about healthcare. This show is for from the CEO to the new employee to the aspiring healthcare professional. We all can learn, we can all find inspiration and joy from each other. And thinking about what drew you into healthcare, Nancy, I think is beautiful for our listeners also to think about what drew you into healthcare. Because hell, if we can connect more and more to a purpose, it is a protective barrier, protective factor from burnout. Because if we're dealing with burnout, one of the biggest things we can do is connect to our meaning and purpose. And so I love you sharing that story. As a neuropsychologist, I know listeners can't help but be thinking about that question for themselves. Why am I doing this? And it gets back to purpose. So one of the challenges in dealing with burnout, whether you're a provider, whether you're a physician, a nurse, a clinician, or a leader, or both, is we all deal with resistance. And so I'd love to, I love this. You've got amazing blog. You've got a lot of great content out there. Let's talk about, here's a question. What do you mean by making friends with resistance?
Absolutely. And people who are listening right now, they must be thinking, you're crazy. How can you make friends with resistance, right? It's funny because when people think of resistance, a lot of the times it's something negative. So if I'm doing a workshop or if I'm having a conversation like this, when I ask people, well, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of resistance? It's often negative.
Sure.
Words like, right? I hear words like obstacle, blockade, stubborn, impeding progress, challenge, conflict, right? And it doesn't have to be that way, because resistance is really a natural part of any change that we're bringing to the table, whether
Oh my
it's
God. And you said the change word, because then people
yes, the
then
C
we
word.
can't help but think of like, blood pressure, right? And what you're doing is normalizing that it's normal part of
Yes.
what we do, right?
It's an absolute normal part of what we do, whether we're undergoing an individual change that we think might be very simple,
Yeah.
or whether we're helping a team go through a change, or Patrick, at the organizational level, if we're doing something huge, like a merger, we're going to bring two organizations together. Like the potential for resistance there on so many levels is very high.
Yeah.
Because it's normal. It's like a friend that you have next to you all the time, just welcoming it to the table and saying, I know you're here. Glad you're here with us. Let's figure out how to use you.
I love that angle about how to then use resistance, because I love to contemplate the notion of the yoga of healthcare. I'm being a meditator, and the notion of yoga of healthcare, this notion of developing our flexibility and our skills and our abilities, and using resistance as part of the physical yoga. But here you're talking about using resistance to be more, whether it's effective, be more healthy, to be more happy, to be more effective as a leader.
Right.
This, you've written, it can be a gift. So what are your thoughts about, how is resistance a gift?
Absolutely. Well, if you think about why we resist, right? Oftentimes on some level, there's some sort of fear factor in there. Whether it's, at the individual level, we're undergoing some sort of change, or we're trying something new, right? We may be kind of afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back to that big organizational context, like, holy smokes, we're bringing two organizations together.
Yeah.
And this is huge, right?
Yeah.
It's huge on so many levels. We're bringing together cultures and finances and teams and information systems, all these things that are coming together. When the resistance is coming to the table, and, it's funny because I read a great book about resistance. A guy named Rick Maurer wrote Beyond the Wall of Resistance, and he talks about 3 levels of resistance. And when I think about some of the projects that I've led in healthcare, it's just so on the money, because when resistance shows up, it can tell us 3 things. It can tell us that, all right, we don't get what's going on. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand this. Like, I don't understand this change. I don't understand the parts, right? It could tell us that, okay, we get it, but we just don't like it. So, right? So it's like, I understand we're merging. I understand we're doing this, and I don't like it. And oftentimes when that's happening, there is that very, very strong fear underlying what's in there,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And then on the 3rd level, there's the resistance that comes to the table. I don't like you. And when he says, I don't like you, it's not necessarily, I don't like you, Patrick. It's, there's something here that I don't trust. Maybe it's something from the past. Let's say, you and I are working on a merger team together, and we met in a past life. We were on a project, and somehow I wronged you, or I did something that violated your values. You don't trust me, and you're showing up with it. The point of talking about all of this is that in those 3 levels of resistance, there is so much information that's coming to the table. If we just pay enough attention to what's really going on. So a lot of the times when resistance shows up, particularly on a team where, we're doing some serious business in healthcare, these are high stakes. Patients' lives are at risk, profit margins are at risk. I mean, we've got some fundamentally serious stuff going on here. It's easy to knee jerk and take things personally and be very reactive. But really, when we think about resistance showing up, it's a gift, because it's giving us so much information into the state of mind of our team members and what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And it's telling us, hey, slow down, leader. Pay attention to what's going on here, because there could be some knowledge in here that's useful to you in whatever you're trying to do with your team, with your department, with your organization.
I appreciate that because you touched on resistance being I don't get it, I don't understand it, I understand it but I don't like it. On a personal level, the interaction, the dyad, the pair, the I don't like you or trust you, and you're touching on great wisdom there because it's not just leaders, but heck, listeners may have a coworker that they're in a clinical setting or they're in finance or and they're in other departments, whether you're frontline, back office, there's always that resistance that can occur in the workplace, right? And you're
Absolutely.
touching on some wisdom that people can practically, at least you're starting with the awareness. I mean, earlier I was reading
That's
your
right.
bio, increasing
That's right.
awareness, because if you're aware, then you can do something about it. If you're
That's right.
coming to the table and saying, I don't get this, or I don't like it, I get it, I don't like it, or I don't trust this person, practically, is there coaching suggestion that you have folks for how to turn that into a gift?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you're thinking about, the fear factor or the trust factor, it's I tell my clients it's a wonderful time to sit down and engage in conversation with whatever is bringing that resistance. So if it's face to face kind of conflict, or there's a one-to-one relationship where something's amiss, or you're leading a team and you're sensing, good grief, this dynamic is just not feeling good, and this is really getting in the way.
Yeah,
It's I Instead of running away from it, which people want to do because sometimes this is uncomfortable, Patrick. It's uncomfortable to engage in these sorts of things.
yeah.
I tell them this is the precise time to lean in with your
Mm,
authentic self
mm,
and get curious about, so what's going on with you? What's going on with this team? But then being a leader, what's going on with us? Like, asking those questions and getting to what I call the whys,
yeah,
and peeling back that onion and
yeah,
saying, let's dig in here and really understand with a spirit of compassion and generosity, how we can use this fear, or how we can learn from what's happened with a misunderstanding that created this lack of trust, if you will.
yeah.
So really, really showing up with a transparency, with an openness. And then, just thinking back to a client situation I had the other day where we talked through how he was going to approach somebody who he had wronged, and showing up and saying, look, I'm aware that this happened in the past, and I want to tell you I'm sorry. I understand that I've hurt you, and I understand that this is what I did, and it made you feel this way, and I'm going to do my best to show up better and to repair this. So it's really about coming to the table and leaning in, engaging and being curious. And then there's an element of accountability where it's like owning your role in, am I triggering resistance in somebody, or am I triggering resistance in my team
Mm,
because maybe I'm not leaning in enough, or maybe I'm rushing things when it comes to just pounding this change through. Because Patrick, you've been in healthcare long enough, the deadlines are fierce, the pressure is high, the stress is huge, right? And we're all well-intentioned people, and we bring to that table that high achieving excellence, we're going to get it done. But I always remind people, at what cost, right?
right, right. Yeah, because ultimately it's about people and not the numbers. And you said a lot of great content there. And I just comment on the lean in. I'm glad you said lean in because in the back of my mind, I am thinking your message here I'm hearing and feeling is that when there is resistance, you've essentially got a choice. We've got a choice. We withdraw and we may end up avoiding something and may have a short-term benefit from it, but we lose when we disengage. Actually, we hurt ourselves. And so if there's a listener, I want to encourage folks to think about what resistance you may be facing in your day, well, heck, in your personal life too, but in your work life, if you're leaning back, and what consequences that having as opposed to leaning into it. And you said the word compassion earlier,
Yes.
and I was pleased and like surprised, and because it does tie into this, and that's a practical wisdom that the benefit of coaching, and you and I both coach people, and it's more than just effectiveness and outcomes and these numerically driven concepts, but the deeper, more meaningful about compassion and meaning and joy. The episode being titled How to Deal with Resistance, Lead Effectively, and Find Joy at Work. I love that you touched on the compassion. And so how does one navigate this? Any other story that comes to mind that is inspiring that you came across?
You know, it's funny because I had changed jobs at one point, and I was meeting with a new, very senior physician who was in a very senior position on his service. And, you know, I'm brand new, and I'm in my suit and pearls, and I'm going to meet him, you know, as the new administrator, right? You know, all excited to meet this guy. Well, Patrick, this guy was not excited to meet me. So I get into his office, you know, he's got all the diplomas on the wall and things going on, right? He's in his white coat with his shirt and tie, right? He's got his arms folded and he's glaring at me. Oh, I'm thinking, oh dear, this is going to be fun, right? And, you know, after I greet him, you know, I'm Nancy Jacoby, blah, 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 blah. I don't know why you're here. I don't need you here. I don't want you here.
Oh, God.
Now you're talking about some serious levels of resistance.
Resistance, yeah.
Right. I think we got a winner here for
Yeah.
levels, right? And, you know, if I think about it, you know, retrospectively, I understand why, because a lot of administrators that he dealt with, you know, come in and the first thing they want to do is cut his budget and come in and tell him everything he's doing wrong and everything that he should be doing. And here's what you should do, and start like 9 different change initiatives at a time and boss him around. So what he's thinking, you know, so I'm in my little suit and pearls, I'm representing the administrators that have come in the past, and he's thinking, oh, here's another flavor of the month that's going to come in and, you know, whack my budget and tell me what to do. And I said, all right, so in coaching mode, meet the person where they are, right? You know, so I said to him, all right, you know, I'm really glad you shared that with me, and I appreciate your candor. And, you know, I understand that it's, you know, frustrating to have new people come in. And what I really want to do with you today, if it's all right with you, is just to learn from you, because I'm new, and I'd really appreciate you sharing with me what's going on the service and what are the challenges that you're facing right now. You know, what's keeping you up at night? And then maybe you and I could talk about if there's any possible way that I could help you, you know, at some point. You know, let's just kind of hash that out. And he kind of settled down a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, you know, we were peas and carrots from that day. We were not. It took a lot of time, Patrick, with me, you know, showing up at his office, you know, showing up at his office again, showing up at his office, the same sorts of thing, until one day he looked at me, he said, you want to know what's keeping me up at night? Come over to this computer. I want to show you this, you know, this EMR. I want to show you how many clicks I have to make. And I'm like, okay, we're getting somewhere, right? Yeah. You know, so fast forward, working with him, working with the team, we did get to be peas and carrots, and it did get to be a really great relationship. But, you know, you really have to hang in there and
and lean in.
Be that way and lean in and get curious about, you know, what, you know, why is this guy so upset? You said something before about intention when we were talking about, you know, why I got into healthcare and nursing. So intention for a minute, thinking about resistance, because we're humans, and the logical place sometimes that we go is, oh my God, this guy is such a pain in the neck. Why is he being this way? If we just stop and say, you know, all right, this guy's human too. Who, like,
compassion.
What's right, compassion. Like what's happened to him that's creating this reaction? Like what is it about me that's causing him to feel this way? And then how can I help?
Yeah, and that ties beautifully to values. You know, one of the things I want to ask you is what do my values have to do with it, of how to lean into resistance? How does that tie into it, Nancy?
Yeah, well, you know, Patrick, for me, 2 of the most important values at my core are integrity and courage. Right. So saying what we mean, meaning what we say, doing what we say we're going to do, and saying what we're going to do, and having all of those match. So if I'm going to call myself a leader, right, but then when things are hitting the fan, so to speak, or I've got a difficult conversation, or, you know, there's something brewing, whatever you want to call it, if I'm kind of shirking away and, oh, you know, I don't want to deal with that, right, there's a misalignment for me there. Right. I believe we have to have the courage to go there and open up that box and say, you know, listen, and, you know, showing up with our compassionate selves, because I know in healthcare, we're compassionate. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. Right. So there's my third values. I would call it really kindness. That's the way I think about it. But, integrity, courage, and kindness, leading with those three values at the core.
I really appreciate that, Nancy, because it is protection from burnout by knowing what your values are. And for listeners, I want to encourage folks to, what are your values? Because when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, if it hits the shan, what are you falling back on? What are we falling back on? You're touching on something I think really is beautiful personally, professionally, as a leader, as a healthcare person. Whatever your role is, if you have a strong sense of what your values are, if you have some clarity of your value, you're speaking about being able to have a clarity of your values that then helps dealing with resistance, and not only dealing with it, but making it your friend. And I think you did a beautiful job of, it's like this is a martial arts jujitsu as opposed to going against the resistance to actually keto, I think, with the letting that resistance flow. Like that physician example you gave, instead of obliquely going head on and banging into people, to be able to lean in with, and this takes courage. This takes courage, what you're talking about. So with the episode title here, how do we deal with resistance, lead effectively, and find joy at work? I trust that listeners are getting a better sense of how to deal with resistance, how to lead more effectively by having that clarity to be able to join with folks, whether it's on a personal leadership level or you're a CEO of a hospital. I don't care. We're all human beings walking each other home, and there can be joy in that. So I loved you talking about the values, and that leads me to be able to ask you my favorite question to ask my guests, which is, if you, for a brief moment, had the attention of all the healthcare people around the whole planet, just for a brief moment, what would you say to us?
Oh, gosh. I would say healthcare is a serious business, and we deal with some pretty serious stuff, right? But we don't always have to be so serious. So, I would say laugh, love, relax, and enjoy the ride.
I really appreciate that, Nancy. And I think about when I was a young clinician, when I had hair, no gray, and coming into the healthcare profession, there is this sense of the gravitas of healthcare. I wish I had had that within my quiver of arrows when I started, to recognize, yes, there's a gravitas, but also to live, laugh, find that joy along the way. So thank you for saying that. And for a listener, if you're new to the profession, God, hang on to that wisdom from Nancy. And if you're near the end of a career, nearing retirement, it's not too late. This is the time, especially in the face of everything we've been dealing with in healthcare, with burnout and COVID and changes and resistance and all of this, to be able to find some joy in what we do. So thank you for sharing that, Nancy. And I want to ask you, if folks are interested in following up with you and learning more about what you do, where can they go?
Well, Patrick, they can visit my website, njacoby.com. I also have a great guide if they're interested in learning more about resistance or want an exercise that they can go through when they're experiencing resistance. They can text outcomes to 42828, and they'll get my free resistance guide that they can use over and over and over again to help them navigate.
Love it. That is so cool. 42828?
42828.
I want to encourage folks, if you want to follow up, please follow up on that. It's a great resource. I'll have that in the show notes for the podcast on the website, Swift Healthcare /podcast. And I encourage folks to check that out. But Nancy, I'm so grateful that you could be on the show, and just thank you for bringing your strength and compassion and wisdom and experience to be able to share with folks.
Well, Patrick, it's been a true pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, or leave a review about the show on your favorite platform, and learn how to support the podcast as a patron at swifthealthcare.com, where you can also find the show notes and all of our episodes. Thanks for joining us.